You want it to be one way.
Man, I don't
You
know
want it
what
to
you...
be one
Man,
way.
stop.
It's the other way.
Ever since I was a kid, I fell in love with this shit. I've been grinding for some years just to get in this bitch. Watch out for the industry, deliver them hits. Then be in LA trying to find a girl that Drake hadn't hit. Damn, I ain't mean to spill the tea. I took a journey on the toll road. I had to pay the fee. Your mother fed.
What's good, man? And welcome to the latest edition of Chop It Up with Lorenzo. I'm your host. And let's get right into it, man. As we speak, you should be getting this video around the second day of January, and I am excited because I almost forgot that there was a heavyweight pay-per-view card last night. And the reason why I almost forgot that there was a heavyweight pay-per-view card is because of the names that were on this card. Now, this wasn't a traditional pay-per-view as we know it, but it was a traditional pay-per-view in a way. Years ago, I remember Don King putting on cards like this card we just watched all of the time. I do believe there were 7 cards, 2 fights on the 7 fights, 2 fights on the undercard, and then 5 fights on the main card. Of those 7 fights, about 5 of them ended early, which is amazing. There was 1 lightweight fight, Frank Martin, definitely a young lightweight. I think that was his 15th fight he just had. That dude is going to be trouble for any one of these, Lomachenko, Devin Haney. Well, Devin Haney might move up before then, but he is definitely someone that is going to be worthy of having a look or some eyes on him in the future. Some of the other heavyweight contenders, Faust, you'll never know who he is. He was definitely a prospect on his way up, and he looked like he was saved by the referee in the fight because in the 3 or 4 rounds that this fight was actually going on, both fighters went down about 2 times. One fighter went down 3, and that was the actual loser of the fight. To the other heavyweight contenders in this fight, Gerald Washington. Those of you that watch boxing strongly, you may remember Gerald Washington back in the day when he fought Deontay Wilder. You also may remember Gerald Washington being knocked out by Charles Martin, who was also on this card, but he's in the headlining fight, so we'll get to him at the end of this conversation. But Gerald Washington went out there to fight a guy, and that guy really whooped Gerald Washington's ass as soon as he realized that Gerald Washington no longer had the lungs to compete with him. Now, it looked real bad for Gerald Washington as far as his lung capacity is concerned, but it wasn't a bad fight for him at the end of the day, for real at all. It wasn't a bad fight. He was actually using his jab properly until he was tired and couldn't use his jab anymore. And at that point, he just was dropping his hands until the fight was over, basically. The next fight on the card was a rematch that a lot of people would have been unfamiliar with. That is because it was between 2 of these, what I like to call our domestic fighters. You know, you see guys like Derek Chisora and David Price, like that. You see those guys in the UK, and you know they're fighting for those Commonwealth belts. Well, we have the USBF belts and stuff like that. We have versions of those belts over here in the States. You know, we have domestic level fighters over here in the States. And what I saw last night in this rematch between John Rice and Michael Coffey was more of that. You know, it was 2 guys that were on the bubble of being a world class fighter and a domestic class fighter. And what I saw was 2 guys that were really on the domestic level. Now, in the first fight, it was supposed to be Michael Coffey and Gerald Washington, which would have been an interesting fight because both of those guys seem to have trouble with breathing. It's not a lot of it wouldn't have been a lot of action, but Gerald Washington had to pull out due to COVID, so Michael Coffey ended up stepping into the ring on a short notice with John Rice, and John Rice came in shape. He's a big man, but he came in shape, and he beat the shit out of Michael Coffey in that first fight. So going into the second fight, Michael Coffey had a lot to do. Michael Coffey, you know, he was embarrassed in this last fight. He was a prospect. He was the name. You know, he was the one that was being sold. He was the one that was being built up. And it was more of the same. You see how big John Rice was. John Rice came into this fight 6'5", 284 pounds, and he was doing a lot of leaning. He was working behind that jab. I'm saying he's a long man. So if he gets you at the end of his jab, if he can get that right hand off, which he did several times, it's going to be a lot of trouble for a lot of guys that don't do a lot of head movement, don't do a lot of getting on that bike and getting out of these certain situations. So it was just more of the same. That was one of the fights that actually went the distance. I know Sean Porter predicted early on in the card that none of these fights would go the distance, and I didn't think they would either. But that right there was more of a strategic fight of one guy just looking for an opportunity to knock someone out, and one guy just not putting himself in a position to be knocked out because he's already been embarrassed. Might as well go out standing on his feet for this fight in particular. Now, the second to last fight on the card was another one. It was another one of these moments with a heavyweight prospect. Now, Frank Sanchez, the last man to step into the ring against Efe Ajagba. Efe Ajagba is another one of these Nigerian heavyweights. He fights out of the United States of America at this point. Very similar to Wilder as far as their attributes are concerned, as far as height, weight, and what they like to do in the ring. Frank Sanchez went in there around October, November of last year, really pieced the man up. It looked like Efe Ajagba has never had a real boxing match in his life. And when you haven't had a real boxing match in your life and you get into the damn square and circle and your opponent is no other than Frank Sanchez, a Cuban Missile Crisis, it's not much you can do. It's not much you can do at all. And this poor man that was in the ring with Frank Sanchez noticed that, yeah, it really is nothing I can do. Now, this was another short notice fight. I don't believe I recall who Frank Sanchez was supposed to be fighting, but ended up fighting whoever he fought. The most interesting things about that fight was the fact that I saw Canelo Alvarez, who is a stablemate of Frank Sanchez. I saw him get up out of his seat and give Frank Sanchez some pointers. Now, we've seen this before. Where have we seen this before? We've seen this with Floyd Mayweather and Gervonta Davis. We've seen it in the Barrios fight, if I'm not mistaken. It was either the Barrios fight or the Santa Cruz fight, in which Floyd Mayweather actually got up from his seat and walked over to the corner to let the man know how this fight was being scored and how this fight was looking. Now, Canelo didn't have to go over there and tell Frank Sanchez that shit at all, because Frank Sanchez was way up. Frank Sanchez was comfortable. He just wanted to, in my opinion, be a part of the show. You know what I'm saying? This is one of his fighters. This is Canelo is the head guy in the stable, so he's definitely looking out for these guys. He believes that Frank Sanchez can be a heavyweight title contender, if not a champion, by the end of next year. And I can't say that it's too far-fetched because Usyk has the belts. And if there's anybody that I've seen with the skills to beat Usyk, it's the Cuban Missile Crisis, Frank Sanchez. I mean, those guys just hit different. But to that point, before I move on to the last fight, the very first fight on the undercard was Bruzon and Pero, which are two guys that were 6-0 and 5-0 respectively. Now, you don't see that too often against each other in a ring, but it's a pay-per-view fight, and they threw those two young Cubans in there together. Those guys put on a show that fight was much better. I would much rather have that fight been on this pay-per-view than the John Coffey, than the Michael Coffey, John Rice fight. I knew I was going to do that eventually. I knew I was going to say John Coffey when it came to Michael Coffey and John Rice. And that's not because both of those guys are big black dudes. But to that point, from Sanchez out here, he got something to say. He basically outcast at the Source Awards. He will not go unnoticed in the future, and that leads us to our last fight. Now, the reason why I paid for this card was this last fight right here. You have Charles Martin, former champion, versus Luis Ortiz, someone who really wants another opportunity to try to become a champion. And Charles Martin lost his belt in the UK to Anthony Joshua. He was basically the guy who, in my opinion, back then of him, sold his belt to Anthony Joshua. I don't believe he was ready for that fight, especially to be a champion fighting in a hostile territory like that. That belt was definitely purchased by the UK. I do believe he got about $5 million for that fight. And that's hard to turn down when you're not making $5 million all the time. You know what I'm saying? But Charles Martin definitely went over there about 5 years ago, lost to Anthony Joshua, and basically put Anthony Joshua on the map. A few years ago, we've seen the only two times that Luis King Kong Ortiz, took his L's were against Deontay Wilder. And he was definitely up on the cards in both of those fights before he suffered that debilitating right hand in either of those fights. So to see common opponents fighting each other is always exciting, especially when the guys that we are interested in, that these two guys haven't fought each other. And that's something that we can obviously look forward to in 2022. But it was a very competitive fight. Round 1 or 2, Ortiz went down. And then we had to start listening to these commentators talk to us about he's 42 years old, he's not the same, yada yada. But hey man, the commentators are as in the moment as we are, man. They're seeing what we're seeing, but they're not watching it how we're watching it. They are there, they got different angles. We're watching TV, we definitely have sometimes a lot better angles because we can see things on the downward, whereas they're looking at things for the most part on an upward trajectory. But after he went down, which was a clean, smooth overhand left right at the top of the head, he had no choice but to go down. It was more of a flash knockdown than anything, but he got up, and I'd say 2-3 rounds later, round 6, he knocked Martin down once. Next thing I know, yep, this fight's about to be over. And he got him again, round 6, KO. Now he is, if I'm not mistaken, the IBF mandatory. So he's coming for that red belt. And now I'd say a year from now, which is, a year from now, by 2023, he might get a title shot. And who knows how these title shots are going to work with boxing looking the way it's looking right now. The heavyweight champions right now are Tyson Fury with the WBC belt, as well as the Ring Magazine belt, and the other 3 belts belong to Usyk. Usyk, with the notion that Canelo might be moving up to cruiserweight, wants to go back down to fight Canelo. Canelo's like, I don't know if I'm going to cruiserweight if he's coming back down. So that's in the air as far as who Usyk is going to fight next, who Deontay Wilder is going to fight next. I mentioned earlier it could be him and Anthony Joshua in 2022, which that is a fight that is worth it to make for me. I watched Deontay Wilder fight anyone. I watch him fight Andy Ruiz, so on and so forth. But I would much rather see him fight Anthony Joshua, and I don't even care where they do it at. I just want to see who is the best boxer out of those two guys, who is really here, who was talking that shit and really meant that shit as far as this is concerned, their beef is concerned. We've been talking about this fight for I've been talking about this fight since Charles Martin got beat by Anthony Joshua. That's how long these guys have been in this boxing conversation. And sometimes you just have to wait these guys out. There are a lot of fights that we still want to see, but me ain't marinated for 5 years. And for the most part, 3, 4, 5 years is what you have to wait for in order to get a good fight. Like I said, you don't get what you saw earlier with those 6-0 and 5-0 fighters. You don't get that all the time. You rarely get that, if any. You know what I'm saying? If at all, you rarely do get that. So shout out to the Cubans for that. And hopefully 2022 would be a better year for boxing. But actually, it's going to be the same. It's going to be the exact same. I'm going to come in here and talk about things that really piss me off. But I'm really going to come in here and talk about the things that really make me happy as far as this fight game goes. Because, like I said, last year when Teofimo lost to George Kambosos, I was so excited that I lied to myself and said boxing was about to get easier. Boxing was about to start making fights. Oh, no, 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 my friend. This is still boxing. We still looking for a way to make the most money by doing the less work. And who can blame a boxer for that? Until next time, it's been your boy, Way Renzo, always chopping it up with you. Thank you for chopping it up with me. Also, don't forget to subscribe. You know what I'm saying? We're going to get those numbers up. And like I said, man, we're going to do this a hell of a lot more often, even if it does mean waking up in the wee hours of the morning, having to drink some old breakfast tea. So, pip T.O., guys. Peace.
With that like a matador. My chief from Seattle like Macklemore. In the lake smoking kush by the back door. Gotta stay down like a floor. Gotta be humble through all I endure. You ain't focused on cash, then you immature. Trying to rule this shit in with a fish.